right, leaving the beach now as this August trip continues. Day 4 in peace against chaos. We're leaving l'île de l'Orient. L'île de l'Orient? L'île d'Orléans.
D'Oléron.
Oh god, I can't say this. And d'Oléron. L'île d'Oléron. Oh. And the tide is low, my friends. We are crossing the bridge now. The tide is very low.
On voit les casiers à huîtres. Là, les trucs qui sont sur le... Ça, c'est les huîtres.
Things for oysters.
Et les foot sur les...
So we're crossing this bridge, and it's making me think of the bridge that I have to cross in terms of learning how to speak about my identity as a Franco-Ontarian. So this will be a little bit messy because it's a story that I haven't really figured out how to tell just yet. It's the kind of story where you're like, well, do I tell this story? I feel like I should tell it in French, but at the same time, I don't. And that's what's interesting about the Franco-Ontarian identity, is that it's an identity that was only like quite recently created for us people, for us like French Canadians in Ontario, either born in Ontario or living in Ontario. That's the thing, there are like different ways to kind of describe Franco-Ontarians, whether they actually speak French or if they're just from French speaking like parents, born in Ontario and like don't really speak French anymore. They're all like it's a kind of a mixture of what that actually means to be Franco-Ontarian. And that's what makes it a little bit confusing, because there's like this sense of, if you're a Franco-Ontarian and you went to school in French in Ontario, which is like a feat in itself, because there was a time in the early 1900s where they banned French in the schools. If you went to school in French in Ontario, there was such pressure to like keep the language that, of course, a lot of people kind of wanted to rebel at school and like not speak French anymore. I went to a school and we barely spoke French. We didn't speak French in the halls. We spoke French in class, and that was about it. And we were left with this sense of guilt. That's what it is for me, of guilt around not being French enough. With this feeling of like a lack of identity because we feel like we don't fit in anywhere. We're not quite the Anglophones in Ontario, but we're also not quite as French as like we felt like our teachers wanted us to be, or you know, and some people did speak a lot more French, and those were the ones that we looked at and were like, okay, well, they're truly a Franco-Ontarian, so where does that leave me? Where am I? And it kind of just makes you feel lost and adrift in all of that. I think there are a lot of people who can kind of relate to that story, because if you've immigrated or if you've moved to another country and you have like this culture or this other language that's a part of you but not only one thing, where you're kind of just torn between identities, between countries, between cultures. And while we can celebrate that and like feel really awesome about that, if we let ourselves, we can also feel like we don't belong anywhere. And being an intuitive, being somebody who already feels like you don't belong anywhere because of the way that your mind and like your approach to the world and the way that you function is already like quite different than what we're used to seeing, or what our world wants us to be, like in a kind of predominantly censor world. It just kind of adds to that layer of difficulty. Because whether I like to admit it or not, a sense of identity is important in terms of feeling kind of stable, in terms of feeling at peace. Talking about peace this month, right? Feeling that inner peace, just like kind of feeling like you have some grounding, some kind of roots, some kind of culture. In one of my classes this year, a student, when asked about where he felt like he got his wisdom from, like, or what wisdom was for him, that's what he said, that it came from his ancestors, from his culture. And I thought that was really interesting, because that is something I never would have said, because I don't feel at all connected to any kind, like to a culture or to ancestors, because I guess there's just so much of a mix in there, and there's not a lot of emphasis put on that where I'm from, or in the family that I grew up in. And to hear somebody say that just reminds you how important it can be. And so I think it's something that I need to try to rebuild for myself, that people who have these like kind of multi-background kind of stories need to like rebuild and celebrate. And I've mentioned this story before in my podcast, Messages from a Bilingual Heart, but it does come back to me a lot, is when a friend of mine said, or was amazed at one time when we were having a party, and you know, they had some like Anglophone Ontarians there kind of singing songs. I was able to sing those songs, and then we had some Francophones in the room, and then, you know, they were kind of bringing out their French songs, and I was able to sing those songs too. Like, I have that mixture. I know like both sides of the story, and you know, my friend was amazed. He was like, wow, it's actually really cool that you know like all of the songs, you know, both sides. And I'm like, yeah, it is, you know, and I'm tired of kind of feeling like letting that feeling of being torn or lost or like kind of without an identity. I'm tired of letting that take away my inner peace, when really there's something beautiful there to be celebrated. And for Franco-Ontarians, trying to get past that guilt of not being like the prized Franco-Ontarian, there's like this sense of like, you see a Franco-Ontarian kind of have some kind of success, and a successful Franco-Ontarian is somebody who like manages to keep their French, to like, you know, kind of like bust through the framework of like assimilation and like losing our French, and if you see them like succeeding and speaking French for us, it's like, oh, that's the prize, that's like the perfect like Franco-Ontarian, wow, they did such a good job. And so the rest of us kind of feel like, well, yeah, maybe I kept my French. I mean, I kept my French maybe more than some other people that I know, and so I can imagine how they feel if I already feel like a certain amount of guilt. think there's really an underlying guilt there, and also this inferiority kind of complex, because we're not as connected to that, because we don't speak Quebec or French, because we don't speak French from France. We're just kind of, we feel like crap. We feel like we're nothing. So this is just the first attempt in trying to express some of what is within me around this kind of stuff. I did it in English to try to celebrate that side of being Franco-Ontarian, like to show that like it's okay, you know, we have both languages, and I'm not gonna feel bad about the fact that I feel comfortable speaking English.